Good morning and welcome to Can We Talk? I'm Theresa Skorseth. Our guest today, well, not a guest, it's Robin Hensel. I don't know I think of you as a producer, a co-producer of this program, you and Chris. Um, and I'm just the unpaid help. No, I'm joking. We've got a lot to talk about today. This is a continuation of our last program, and in our last program, Robin promised that she would talk next about an increase in drone production.
Right, this is an article titled U.S. Military Prepares Drastic Escalation of Global Drone Program. It's on a site called commondreams.org. It's dated Monday, August 17th, 2015. U.S. military prepares drastic escalation of global drone program. New report reveals plan to expand drone program by 50%, including broader use of mercenaries. According to officials, the Pentagon hopes to expand the use of lethal drone strikes in the years ahead. And that's what the article looks like, so you know you have the right one when you're looking online. The U.S. Pentagon is poised to dramatically increase the deployment of surveillance drones over global hotspots such as Ukraine, Iraq, Syria, the South China Sea. And that's a whole nother topic. That's probably one of the scariest areas in the world right now, the South China Sea. And North Africa, as well as expand its capacity for lethal drone strikes. Citing exclusive interviews with senior U.S. officials, the WSJ's Gordon Lubold reports that the number of daily flights by aircraft such as MQ-1 Predator and MQ-9 Reaper drones will surge an estimated 50%. Further, the expanded drone program will draw on the Army, as well as Special Operations Command and government contractors, in addition to the United States Air Force, which currently carries out most of the operations for the Pentagon and Central Intelligence Agency. Lubold reports the Pentagon envisions a combined effort that by 2019 would have the Air Force continue flying 60 drone flights a day, the Army contributing as many as 16, and the Military Special Forces Command pitching in with as many as 4. Government contractors would be hired to fly older Predator drones on as many as 10 flights a day, none of them strike missions. A detailed investigations published late July by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism revealed the great extent which the military has already relied on corporate entities for much of its surveillance and analysis. The probe raised the question as to whether a private contractor's risk assessment, i.e. the determination whether an individual should become a target, obeys an already mushy legal framework. Monday's WSJ piece notes that other officials are reportedly pushing for even broader surveillance capabilities, employing technologies known as wide area airborne surveillance pods, which increase by as many as tenfold the new quantity of surveillance feeds. The U.S. is currently holding talks with a number of North African countries over the possibility of erecting drone bases within their borders, expanding the military footprint in order to allegedly unmask so-called blind spots in Islamic State strongholds such as Libya and Tunisia. According to the latest tally from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, since 2002 there have been as many as 620 total U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Afghanistan, killing up to 5,460 people, including as many as 1,106 civilians. That's troubling.
That's very troubling.
And we still don't have a drone policy in this city, something I brought up in 2012.
Yes, yes.
No,
And that matters because Camp Ripley is a center for drone drills and practices and teaching, so Little Falls is right in that fly zone.
Right, well, as of a year or two ago, they've been drone bombing with the Shadow drones out there, actually using armed drones and bombing at Camp Ripley.
Good grief.
And that matters because our soldiers may be implicated in war crimes if it is deemed in a court of law to have it been illegally drone assassinating people throughout the world. Our Army people and other branches of the military may indeed be accused of or convicted of war crimes in doing these, and that should be a great concern to everyone.
It should be, yes.
I want to switch topics here a little bit, but it's related. I've decided to do something with my front yard that I haven't before. Some may know that I have had mailboxes out front that were an exception under the sign ordinance, but not in the new amendments.
Yes.
They've taken away that loophole because some have complained and not liked the fact that I have 2 additional mailboxes out front that have had some writing on that people don't like, which I was within my legal rights to do because there was this exception in the sign ordinance that was supposedly constitutional, that was passed in 2012 and then amended in 2013. Okay, so recently, I suppose it's been about a week ago, I painted over my mailboxes. I had written on there, kids don't join the Army, and U.S. government is corrupt, and some other things that probably some in this community don't like, but it's my feelings. It's what I really believe. And now my mailboxes are just mailboxes with no writing on, okay? And so I decided to use 2 of my globes, world globes, and erect little men, little soldiers and tanks and Air Force jets and different things. I glued them onto the globe, and then I glued the globe onto my mailboxes on top.
Oh, interesting.
And it is to send a message of our quest for world domination and full spectrum dominance. And I believe that's wrong. And I've decided to do some things. There's a flag, by the way, on top of the globe as well, United States flag. Because in the new sign ordinance, there's no restriction on flags being placed on the lot line. You don't have to have a setback like you do with signage. So I decided to bloody some flags, and here are the British, the Israeli, and the United States flags made to look like they're bloodied. I used paint, orange and red paint, to illustrate to people that there's a lot of blood on our hands, there's a lot of blood on Britain's hands, there's a lot of blood on the Israelis' hands, and I've ordered a Saudi Arabia flag. It should be coming within the week, and I intend to bloody that as well. Because in my opinion, there's 4 nations in this world that are most responsible for most of the heinous crimes and things that are going on in our world. First and foremost, the United States, I believe, is the biggest terrorist in the world. And it's a tie for second place with Israel and Saudi Arabia for a whole bunch of reasons. The illegal invasion of Iraq, but there's things leading up to that that were not correct. The first invasion. And also, Britain was our ally in that. We give I think it's $3 billion a year to Israel, and that money is used to help fund the illegal occupation of Palestinians, which is basically a concentration camp. It's a prisoner camp, and both of us have disagreed with that for years now. But I put these 3 flags are now on display out front of my house, as well as the globes. And I'll show you a picture of one of the globes. And why I have done this is it's a depiction of what our nation is doing is wrong. We claim American exceptionalism. That can't possibly be true. Destroying human life, destroying other people's property, grabbing up other countries' resources, if that's exceptional, I want no part of it.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, and I'll say it again until the day I die. Until my nation stops warring and doing the rotten criminal things it is, I am ashamed of my country. And I would say that to anybody. I'm saying it to the world. Who could ever be proud of a military in a country that has done the things that we've done. Who could be?
Mhm.
It's just plain wrong. That will lead us right into this article titled, "We're Citizens, Not Subjects. We Have a Right to Criticize Government Without Fear." And it's written by Chelsea Manning,
Chelsea Manning.
who is, of course, imprisoned because he exposed the illegal gunning down of people in Iraq. And that video is called Collateral Damage. And you can watch it online now. And the things that our military said as they were gunning down these innocent individuals in Iraq is, it makes me want to vomit.
It's stomach turning.
Yes. And I'm going to let Theresa read the highlighted information here, give her a turn at that.
The American public needs more access to what the government is doing in its name. That requires increasing freedom of information and transparency. When freedom of information and transparency are stifled, then bad decisions are often made and heartbreaking tragedies occur, too often on a breathtaking scale that can leave societies wondering, how did this happen? Think about the recent debates on torture, assassination by unmanned aircraft, secret warrants and detentions, intelligence and surveillance courts, military commissions, immigration detention centers, and the conduct of modern warfare. It is time that we bring a healthy dose of sunlight to them. I believe that when the public lacks even the most fundamental access to what its government and militaries are doing in their names, then they cease to be involved in the act of citizenship. There is a bright distinction between citizens who have rights and privileges protected by the state and subjects who are under the complete control and authority of the state. In the past decade or so, there have been an increasing number of clashes, both in the public and behind the scenes, between the U.S. government, the news media, and those in the public who want fair access to records that pertain to the implementation of policies by their government. After 9/11, a dedicated office of lawyers specializing in novel applications of law for national security issues, the National Security Division, was created. And now, with a small caseload and an enormous amount of resources, this division of the Department of Justice has been waging a quiet war against the media, their sources, and the right to free speech and a free press, using the growing national security and surveillance apparatus to prosecute cases, various cases, and occasionally target the media.
She's only reading part of this, folks. To get the whole gist of it, you really should look up the article and read all of it. And we're talking about Bradley Manning, of course, who has converted to Chelsea Manning while he's in prison now, is the one who wrote this. Go ahead.
The U.S. needs legislation to protect the public's right to free speech and a free press, to protect it from the actions of the executive branch, and to promote the integrity and transparency of the U.S. government. We need to create a media shield law with teeth and substance, that creates an effective federal privilege for communications between a journalist and her sources, preventing the government from compelling testimony from the journalist, and to protect the documents, records, and other information created by the journalist and the actual communications between the journalist and her source. The privilege should be in effect unless the government can prove with clear and convincing evidence that very clear and dangerous circumstances should merit an exception.
That leads us right into, I know Chris has been airing John Kirioko, that I went down to the cities to hear him speak at Hamline University recently. He, of course, is the whistleblower that exposed the torture program, the fact that the United States government had a torture program, and even though he never tortured, never gave out any names of any classified information, but he's the only one that served any prison sentence in the torture program. Who should have been sent to prison were those who tortured.
Yeah.
And those who wrote the torture program, implemented it, were involved in it whatsoever. He was recently honored, and I just want to read this little clip here. This is called CIA Whistleblower Kirioko Honored. And so John Kirioko was honored by, he was the first U.S. official to confirm that the waterboarding was used to torture war on terror detainees, then faced a retaliatory prosecution and 30 months in prison. Recognizing his sacrifice, the literary group PEN, P-E-N, gave Kyrioko its First Amendment Award, observed CIA analyst Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern is also a whistleblower. And this article is written by Ray McGovern. On November 16th, Penn Center USA, the West Coast branch of Penn International, gave former CIA officer John Kyrioko its First Amendment Award for his role in exposing waterboarding as torture used during President George W. Bush's war on terror. Kyrioko then faced retaliation, which led to a 30-month prison term for revealing classified information. And there's more to this article. I recommend you read it. Now I want to talk about a letter to the editor. It's called Syrian Refugees, an Open Letter to City Council, and it's on the greenvilleguardian.org website.
Is that Greenville, South Carolina?
Yes. And one of my friends is from there, and he's a very good writer. But this is written by another individual whose name is Uriah Ward, to the mayor and city councilors of Greenville. Now, pretend, folks, that we're putting in the name Little Falls, because it could and should apply to here as well. I'm writing to you to encourage you to take a difficult stand for something important by making an offer to those in need. The United States has moved to accept refugees who are fleeing the chaos and destruction of the civil war in Syria. All across the country, political figures have decided to stoke fear and have called for the refugees to be turned away from their country, their state, or this country as a whole. This decision to embrace fear over our tradition of charity and strength is damaging to us at home and abroad. The best of our nation is symbolized by a tall green figure proclaiming, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." And of course, that's the Statue of Liberty they're referring to here. We must be our best by aiding those whose lives have been destroyed by Daesh, ISIS, and show the world that we are still willing to be the shining example of what is right in the world. Innocent people are fleeing a terrifying reality and need help. The federal government has already determined that refugees will be accepted into our country, and the process has already begun. Those who have come out against this have no power to stop it, but have made an embarrassing symbolic gesture nonetheless. Standing up to baseless fear, several governors and mayors, including that of our neighbor in Chapel Hill, have taken a stand for what is right and made it clear that refugees are welcome. We should do the same. As a city, we should constantly be looking for opportunities to stand out and boldly do what is right, even when it isn't easy. I want to encourage you to become a beacon of hope and clear thinking by passing a resolution expressing Greenville's, or Little Falls, willingness to accept Syrian refugees. You may be inclined to dismiss this idea as something that doesn't affect us, or as something that as the council has no control over, but I encourage you to not let pass this opportunity to display Greenville's, Little Falls's, hospitality and generosity. If you take this stand, you will show the state and the world that Greenville, Little Falls, is a place where cool heads, strong resolve, and big hearts rule. And if these refugees can escape terror by making their way to our city, I'm certain they will be happy to find themselves in good company. And the other thing that should be inserted and changed in that, if I were reading that to our city council, would be instead of Syria, Somalia. Because it is Little Falls' great fear, some in this city, who are fear-mongering, hate-mongering, intolerant individuals, I believe connected sincerely with our senior center. They're terribly fearful of Somalians, and Somalians, the ones that I have met in St. Cloud, have been some of the most stellar, upright citizens and decent individuals, filled with hospitality and genuine warmth that I haven't known by some of the people in this city.
And this was part of the Roach construction issue. One of the things that came in on the side of let's not do this.
Right,
Was
the fear factor.
the fear factor that those fourplexes, if they were allowed to be built, would be immediately filled up with Somalians. You know, I know a lot of East African and North African people. They are just some of the most genuine, sweet, gentle, nice people, smart, capable, hardworking, honest. I can't say enough good things about them. And to have some people say, but they're Muslims, so therefore they're going to, shoot us in our beds while we're sleeping is just, can I just interject this? I've been thinking lately, our brains are constructed to solve problems. And when we see something happening, we think, okay, where do I come in? What can I do about this? What's my responsibility here?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I go?
Mm-hmm.
And so we immediately start trying to solve whatever the problems are.
Mm-hmm.
Among the many difficulties in all of that is that we don't have good information, and we've just been hearing about that from Chelsea Manning and any number of people.
Mm-hmm.
So people are going on rumor and guesswork and kitchen table speculation and a lot of Facebook and internet blue skying. We have in many ways too much information and too little both. So we tend to think that we can get a handle on this if we just take a hard stand, let's just not let them in. Let's just do the simplest, strongest thing that we can possibly do. We'll make it a huge problem, and then we'll just smash it.
Well, and in Morrison County, let's face it, we have two news sources, and they're both radically right-wing, conservative, and much of it is misinformation, if not completely false. And we're talking about the radio station, KLTF, and all their programming is tilted in a direction that is against what you would hear on a Twin Cities broadcast show or something on the national level, New York Times or some other news source that is way beyond small town America. And when the Morrison County Record and KLTF radio is pumping out all this stuff that is non-factual or tainted in some fashion to get the consumers, the listeners, to view things a certain way, it bends their minds.
Yeah, it does.
And frankly, people don't seem to be literate enough or energetic enough to get off their behinds and do some fact checking and some of their own investigation of other news medias. In any given situation, check at least half a dozen to 12 different news media sources so you know you're getting accurate information. And don't just go to those that lean towards your political or ideological or spiritual thought. Go to the others so you can get the full spectrum of all of it. Colleen Rowley is right to say that this political divide that we have in our country, you have some of the worst warmongers and hawkish people that are on the left, that are claiming to be left, but they're not. They're moderates, and they're just going to, if elected, they will just exacerbate world wars and problems for us in the war machine. And this may be the first year in my life where I don't vote.
Really?
I in my opinion, there's not a good major candidate at all right now. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, is the only true peace candidate that is recognizable at any kind of level, and but they don't let her speak at any of the debates. And even though it would be sort of pointless to vote for somebody who isn't likely going to get elected, if I were to vote, and I'm really not sure that I'm going to this year, someone like she would be my choice for president. I certainly couldn't pick any of the other candidates because they all will just exacerbate and make things worse with our military and our war machine. And I think if there's a reason to vote, it's to make sure that we get somebody representing us to change course in that area. It takes a really strong individual to stand up for peace.
It does. It does.
And to say that publicly, I've been really disappointed with even some that I have voted for in the past who happen to have been Democrat. They haven't taken a strong enough stand, or been bold enough in what they say about not making war. We have enough evidence out there that everything we're doing with our military for invasions, bombings, drone assassinations, all of it, we're just making more enemies every day. Mm-hmm. By the way, so that I don't forget, I'm not going to read this because it's too lengthy, but it is well worth the read. It's by Nick Turse, Turse, and it's titled America's Secret War in 134 Countries. And Nick Turse is one of the most brilliant writers on war issues than anyone. So look this article up, folks, and read it. It's dated January 16, 2014. Again, the title, America's Secret War in 134 Countries. But it's real important as of even today. I have two topics yet, and they're lengthy, and I'm torn as to which we should discuss first. One was sent to me by Colleen Rowley, titled, Did the United States Navy break federal laws to push war games over the national forests? And the other is, on the 20th of November, Andrew Basevich spoke at the Methodist Church, the Hennepin Methodist Church in the cities. And this is some really good stuff in this article. It's titled Military, it's by MinPost, so you can look it up yourself. And I have all this stuff on my blog too. The links are there. You just have to find the article where I posted it. I think I posted this article on a number of my blogs. I've been kind of mixing it up. Yeah. I've been teasing people by having one title of a blog and then I include some other information. Hopefully that people might click that, even by accident, and actually read or listen to the video that I've put on those blogs for a reason, because it's all important stuff. Military historian Andrew Basevich's devastating review of our 35-year war in the greater Middle East. Maybe because it's less lengthy, maybe we should do this one first. This is what Colleen Rowley wrote in an email to me and other people. Since there's no military draft, no higher taxes, as war costs continue to be put on the national debt card, with the debt limit to be increased shortly, heading to 20 trillion, that's trillion, folks, 20, no troop casualties except for suicides and non-stop effective war propaganda, Americans have largely ceased caring about their ongoing wars that now encompass a half dozen countries, but which they are made to believe only kill and hurt foreigners. But maybe, with little indications like this, some Americans will begin to finally understand how their wars over there are migrating home. There are no boundaries in the global war on terror, which means we are all beginning to live not only in a police state, but in a war zone. And this should interest you, as I believe you have a relative on the West Coast. So I'm going to let you read the highlighted areas of that article.
Excuse me.
And give the title of that too, please.
Okay. Did the U.S. Navy break federal laws to push war games over national forests?
And this is the article that Colleen Rowley was talking about in that email to me.
Okay. The U.S. Navy aims to begin conducting electromagnetic warfare training across much of Washington State's Olympic Peninsula soon. Meanwhile, it's being accused of breaking federal laws in order to secure the permits necessary to move forward with its training operations. Ethical and legal questions about the Navy's conduct abound. Hidden notices, comment periods that have been shortened or wholly eliminated, and last-minute publication of key documents coupled with total disregard for NEPA's, the National Environmental Policy Act, prohibitions on segmentation present a clear and present danger that the Navy is hastily proceeding with plans regardless and in defiance of federally mandated processes. Some of the points of concern include failure, this is on the part of the Navy, failure to provide reasonable notice to the public about their planned war games, failure to provide adequate comment process, failure to address functionally connected activities and their cumulative impacts, and failure to adequately consider impacts to Olympic National Parks World Heritage designation. Thank you. Sullivan, who worked for over 15 years in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Division of Endangered Species and External Affairs, told Truth Out she believes the Navy's final environmental impact statement about their upcoming warfare training is unlawful and fatally flawed. The Navy has an astonishing sense of entitlement to public lands and waters, Sullivan said, about how the Navy has approached the public's concerns over its operations. Northwest Training and Testing Range Manager Kent Mathis told me last year after a public meeting, "We own the airspace and there's nothing anyone can do about it." Huh.
Yeah, they own the airspace.
Yeah, they own it. If it gets its way, the Navy would be flying Growler jets, electronic attack aircraft that specialize in radar jamming, in 2,900 training exercises over wilderness, communities, and cities across the Olympic Peninsula for 260 days per year.
That's almost 3,000 missions.
Oh, yeah. And for most of the year. With exercises lasting up to 16 hours per day. Naval surface fleet ships will also be participating by homing in on ground-based emitters, a topic that was never discussed in the Navy's environmental assessment. Dozens of naval EA-18G Growler supersonic jet warplanes will fly as low as 1,200 feet above the ground in some areas in order to conduct war games with 14 mobile towers on the ground in national forests. Medical doctors, scientific reports, and even the Navy's own documents show that enough electromagnetic radiation will be emitted to be capable of damaging human eye tissue, causing breast cancer, causing childhood leukemia, and damaging human fetuses, let alone impacting wildlife in the area. The Navy has denied these impacts will occur. Medical doctors also told Truth Out that noise from the Navy's jets is a major health risk. Nevertheless, the Navy appears to be rapidly moving forward with its plans to war game over the Olympic Peninsula. In doing so, Sullivan believes it is opening itself up to major lawsuits because it is taking blatantly illegal actions. John Mosher, the Navy's Northwest Environmental Manager for the U.S. Pacific Fleet, has stated that its planes will be flying as low as 1,200 feet above the ground, yet the Navy Environmental Impact Assessment does not even mention jet noise pollution or the sound of the Navy's jets, and states that there are no significant impacts on public health and safety, biological resources, noise, air quality, or visual resources. Tens of thousands of outraged residents from around the Olympic Peninsula have expressed their opposition via letters to the U.S. Forest Service, public meetings, letters to the editor in newspapers across the peninsula, flooding article comment sections. Olympic Forest Coalition is extremely concerned with all aspects of the Navy's proposal, but a primary concern is the disruption to wildlife activities in both the national park, the forest, and our coast. Endangered species such as the marbled murrelet are at 5% population decline due to loss of habitat and other disruptions. Olympic Coast Marine Sanctuary area is also in peril due to the many takes the Navy plans. It is as if our entire ecosystem has been targeted for destruction, and so far the Navy is showing very little concern for it. Apparently the Navy is not having any of it. It is simply ignored or neglected to address resident outcries about its actions. This is a national forest, so if anyone locally wants to get involved, they have every right and reason to do so.
It's one of the most pristine areas in our nation.
Yes, it's beautiful, the whole state, the whole west coast. Northwest coast of America. The bottom line is the Navy doesn't care how we feel about it, and they don't want to hear from us, Sullivan said. If they did, there'd be a real person manning the jet noise complaint hotline, and there'd be a way to get information from them in a timely manner, and there'd be a way for the public to be heard on the record. Their message to communities on the Olympic Peninsula is, go away, your comments don't count.
I think that's the end of that.
That may be the end, okay. Yes, I do have a number of relatives on the West Coast.
I just want to make sure there was nothing else in here. And I don't know when it's going to occur, but the FAA is scheduled to open the Skyway to larger drones. It was scheduled for September of this year, and that date passed, and I don't know what the holdup is, but when large drones can come in, can be flown anywhere in the United States, we're going to be in that traffic zone, folks, because Camp Ripley intends to repair some of the larger drones at their facility. So you'll be seeing them come in here either on the back of a truck or flying in here, and it's gonna change the skies locally.
Yeah.
It's coming. Now, this is Andrew Baichevis's speech, and I'm going to read some, and I'm going to let Theresa read some. It's lengthy, but it's excellent. And I can think of nothing better to talk about now for the remainder of the show than this, because if I could have gone to an event, I wasn't aware that this was going to happen, or I probably would have gone down there and filmed it. But it's excellent.
I like the title, Our 35-Year War in the Greater Middle East. Sometimes we can get so lost in the little details that we forget there's a huge bigger picture, and this is part of it. 35 years, since the 80s.
Right. And this is dated the 20th of November. All this stuff that we've been reading here is current, including that the one in Washington. That was in October and November that those discussions were going on. State of the Union address in January of 1980, President Jimmy Carter announced what became known as the Carter Doctrine. The paragraph that enunciated it, reportedly written by Carter's hawkish National Secretary Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, how do you pronounce that?
Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Okay. Stated, let our position be absolutely clear. An attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States of America, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. Before that, the United States had a relatively small military presence in the Middle East. Since then has grown bigger and bigger. Now with the Obama administration struggling to find a policy to deal with ISIS, you might say that we're marking 35-year plus when military action revolves more and more around Middle East and some other nearby portions of the world in which Islam predominates. And how's that working out? Andrew Bacevich, a retired U.S. Army colonel, now a professor at Boston University and a frequent critic of United States military policy, has a brand new book coming out in the spring that treats the whole story of United States struggles in Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Afghanistan, Libya, and many other predominantly Muslim nations as one long, complicating, ever-morphing war in which the United States has struggled to impose its will on what he calls the Greater Middle East. The book is titled America's War for the Greater Middle East. Now this is the kind of information, folks, that KLTF radio hosts Steve Van Slooten and former Perry Newis and also now Mark Fighton and Corey Fink should be talking about. This is the information you should be getting if they really wanted factual information to get out to. Of course, they don't want you to hear this stuff. No. So hopefully you're able to hear this. We have not won it. We're not winning it, and simply pressing on is not likely to produce positive results next year or the year after. Perhaps even worse than not winning it is not being able to realistically describe what would constitute winning. Toward the end of his talk at Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Minneapolis, Bacevich asserted that even in a presidential campaign, when foreign and military policies are on the table, one subject in particular remains off limits: the overall prospects of the United States military project in the Islamic world. 35 years after Jimmy Carter signed off on the Carter Doctrine, the project appears further from completion than when it had begun. By almost any measure, the region is less stable and more dangerous than it was in 1980. Not only are Americans' purposes unfulfilled, they're becoming increasingly difficult to define with any sort of specificity. And this is the start of the transcription of Bacevich's opening remarks, and I'm going to let Theresa take over here and just read until you find a good place to stop, and then I'll read for a while.
Okay. For well over 30 years now, the United States military has been intensively engaged in various quarters of the Islamic world, and an end to that involvement is nowhere in sight. To tick off the countries in that region that U.S. forces have invaded, occupied, garrisoned, bombed, or raided, and where American soldiers have killed or been killed since 1980. They include Iraq and Afghanistan, of course, but also Iran, Lebanon, Libya, Turkey, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Bosnia, Kosovo, Yemen, Sudan, Somalia, Pakistan, and Syria, and the list just keeps getting longer. What are we to make of the larger enterprise in which the United States has been engaged for the past 3 decades? What is the nature of the struggle we are waging? What should we call it? In the days after 9/11, American called it the global war on terrorism. This misleading term has since fallen out of favor. For a brief period during the early years of the George W. Bush administration, certain neoconservatives promoted the term World War IV. This never caught on, however, in part because, unlike other major conflicts, this one found the American people sitting on the sidelines. With the interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan dragging on inconclusively, some military officers in the middle of the last decade began referring to it as what they called the Long War. And while nicely capturing the temporal nature of the conflict, this label had nothing to say about purpose, adversary, or location. As with World War IV, the Long War never gained traction. Here's another possibility. Since 1980, back when Jimmy Carter promulgated the Carter Doctrine, the United States has been engaged in what we should rightfully call America's war for the Middle East. The premise underlying that can be simply stated: with disorder, dysfunction, and disarray posing a rising threat to the U.S. national security interests, the adroit application of hard power should enable the United States to curb those tendencies and thereby foster conditions conducive to U.S. interests. Use whatever term you like. Police, pacify, shape, control, dominate, transform. In 1980, President Carter launched the United States on a project aimed at nothing less than determining the fate and future of the people inhabiting the nations from West Africa and Maghreb all the way across the Arabian Peninsula and the Persian Gulf to Central Asia. Since the end of World War II, American soldiers have fought and died in Asia, and even when the wars in Korea and Vietnam ended, U.S. troop contingents continued to garrison that region. In Europe, a major U.S. military presence dating to the start of the Cold War signaled Washington's interest to fight there as well. But prior to President Carter's landmark 1980 statement, no comparable commitment to the Islamic world existed, and now that was going to change. Only in retrospect does this become clear, of course. At the time, when President Carter declared the Persian Gulf a vital national security interest, he did not intend to embark upon a war, nor did President Carter anticipate what course that war was going to follow, its duration, costs, and consequences. Like the European statesman who just over a century ago touched off the cataclysm that we now know as World War I, Carter merely lit a fuse without knowing where it led. As an American, let me state plainly my own overall assessment of that war. We have not won it, we are not winning it, and simply pressing on is not likely to produce positive results next year or the year after. The questions arising from this commitment will continue to occupy and perhaps confound scholars for years to come. In my remarks today, I will limit myself to 4 of the most fundamental questions. Maybe this would be a good place for you to step in.
First, what motivated the United States to act as it has? Second, what have the civilians responsible for formulating policy and the soldiers charged with implementing that policy sought to accomplish? Third, regardless of their intentions, what actually ensued? And fourth, with what consequences? Now, bear in mind, this is a former colonel in the United States Army. The United States embarked upon its war for the greater Middle East in order to preserve the American way of life. The United States embarked upon its war for the greater Middle East in order to ensure access to Persian Gulf oil. Both of those statements are true. Back in the 1980s, the American way of life required bountiful supplies of cheap oil. Even today, whether for good or for ill, that remains the case. Back in the 1980s, the approaching depletion of once bountiful American fossil fuel reserves appeared to be an irreversible fact of life. The implications of that fact, driven home to the American people by successful oil shocks during the 1970s, vaulted the oil of the Persian Gulf into the first tier of United States interests. Just as the American Civil War was about slavery, America's war in the greater Middle East has been about oil. Of course, slavery alone did not define all that divided the North and the South. Similarly, from the outset, oil alone does not fully explain what drew the United States militarily in the greater Middle East. At stake were the expectations of limitlessness that many Americans take to be part of their birthright. In the 1970s, the United States had seemingly run headlong into limits. In Vietnam, it encountered a war that it could not win. At home, the golden age of post-war prosperity sputtered to an end. Americans confronted slow growth, high inflation, and industrial decline. The oil shocks of that decade were the icing of an unwelcome and unpalatable cake. The war for the greater Middle East was one expression of a collective determination to affirm the singularity of the United States as a nation not bound by the constraints that others were obliged to respect. In 2000, as the conflict was entering its third decade, the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, took it upon himself to make explicit the rationale for war that until that moment had been largely implicit.
We have a choice, Rumsfeld explained, either to change the way we live, which is unacceptable, or to change the way they live. And we chose the latter. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, what hubris. We are exceptional and indispensable, so most Americans, even today, believe. And just as prior victories, notably in 1865 and 1945, had established and affirmed that singular status, so could victory in the greater Middle East preserve it. Now the resulting war can be divided into 4 phases, that is, 4 phases thus far. Phase 1 began in 1980 with the failed hostage rescue mission known as Operation Eagle Claw, and ended in 1991 with Operation Provide Comfort, the U.S. effort to assist the Iraqi Kurds after Operation Desert Storm. In the interim, that is between 1980 and 1991, an ill-conceived peacekeeping enterprise in Lebanon contrived by the Reagan administration and ending with the Beirut bombing of October 1983 and inconsequential jousting with Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi that ended with the terrorist attack that destroyed Pan Am Flight 103, killing all on board. Meanwhile, during the first Gulf War of 1980 to 1988, the U.S. intervened both openly and covertly on behalf of Saddam Hussein, even as the Reagan administration was secretly and illegally providing arms to Iran. Go figure. In Afghanistan, meanwhile, covert U.S. supplies to jihadists attempting to oust Soviet occupiers ended up creating conditions leading to the rise of the Taliban, while encouraging radical Islamists like Osama bin Laden into the belief that superpowers could be had. Excuse me. When Saddam Hussein responded to the end of his war with Iran by invading neighboring Kuwait, George Herbert Walker Bush, my voice is failing, dear, I'm going to have to turn it over,
assembled a massive coalition that restored Kuwaiti sovereignty in a campaign that seemed for a time to be a massive victory. Appearances deceived, however. The enduring legacy of that war was to reduce any remaining constraints in Washington's inclination to use its military power. United States military intervention in the Middle East was becoming a matter of routine. By the time Phase 1 ended, the United States had committed itself to the greater Middle East on multiple occasions in multiple places. Yet neither Carter nor Reagan nor the elder Bush had devised anything remotely like a strategy to guide United States policy. In Washington, a coherent vision of what the United States was trying to do did not exist. Phase 2 of America's war in the Middle East began in 1992 when the elder Bush ordered United States troops to intervene in Somalia and ended a decade later in 2002 when Bush's son prematurely abandoned Afghanistan, assuming that the overthrow of the Taliban meant that the United States had finished with that country. In the interim between 1992 and 2002, what had begun as a humanitarian intervention on behalf of starving Somalis morphed into an urban insurgency culminating in humiliating withdrawal when the notorious Black Hawk Down incident occurred and persuaded Bill Clinton to cut his losses. Clinton did fare somewhat better in 2 interventions in the Balkans on behalf of besieged Muslim minorities, first in Bosnia, then in Kosovo. A U.S.-led air campaign followed by U.S.-led occupation enabled Bosnian Muslims and then Kosovars to achieve their aims, but without improving Washington's overall standing in the Islamic world. Of greater significance than these two Balkan interventions were the unintended consequences of the so-called dual containment policy, inaugurated by the elder Bush and then sustained by Clinton. Containing both Iraq and Iran in the 1990s required the permanent stationing of United States military forces near the Persian Gulf, notably in Saudi Arabia. Low-level hostilities with Iraq continued throughout this decade, albeit with few Americans taking notice. For his part, bin Laden himself took offense and declared war on the United States. Sporadic attacks on the United States assets ensued in Saudi Arabia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Yemen. Clinton responded in desultory fashion with United States airstrikes. The ineffectiveness of this United States response to al-Qaeda then became fully manifest in 2001 with the devastating attacks in New York and Washington. George W. Bush, now president, responded by declaring a global war that began as a less than a global war, but rather as an effort to punish the Afghans for giving sanctuary to al-Qaeda. The early stages of what was then called Operation Enduring Freedom were dramatic and daring, but inconclusive. But by the time Phase 2 ended, the presence of United States forces in the greater Middle East, in addition to United States intervention in the Middle East, had now become routine. Now, however, for the first time since the inception of the war for the greater Middle East, Washington devised a strategy with which the Bush administration marketed under the label Freedom Agenda. The Third Gulf War began in 2003 and lasting until 2011 was designed to jumpstart the process of transforming those countries that served as breeding grounds for anti-American violence. Here, the United States was set out, in Rumsfeld's words, to change the way we live. This was the vision that animated the United States vision during Phase 3 of its war for the greater Middle East.
Now, as a venue to begin to implement that strategy to change the way they live, Saddam Hussein's Iraq appeared uniquely attractive. True, Iraq had had nothing to do with 9/11, but Saddam had made his country an international pariah, virtually without allies or even sympathizers. The Iraqi army was not likely to pose significant opposition, having amply demonstrated its incompetence even before taking into account the effects of periodic U.S. bombing along with a decade of crippling sanctions. In other words, what made it imperative to invade Iraq was not the danger that Iraq posed, but the opportunity that it presented. I'm going to read that again because that's important. In other words, what made it imperative to invade Iraq was not the danger Iraq posed, but the opportunity that it presented. Mm-hmm. So we went in there because it was easy, an easy target, or it's supposed to be. Excuse me. And although the invaders quickly overthrew Saddam Hussein, they proved when they got to Baghdad unable to assert control of that country. Instead, by their very present U.S. presence, U.S. forces incited and then found themselves enveloped by a complex conflict that was part civil war, part ancient sectarian squabble, and part anti-Western jihad.
We may argue about when to date the demise of the Freedom Agenda. Certainly by late 2006 it had collapsed. Rather than a springboard, Iraq became a dead end, and Phase 3 of America's war for the greater Middle East ended. Phase 4 commenced, but once more, without any unifying sense of purpose. To effect a salvage operation, Bush hired a new field commander. This yielded the so-called surge, which created the conditions for the United States to withdraw from Iraq without having to admit outright defeat. This it did in December of 2011 with Barack Obama keeping this to the schedule that the predecessor had established. Turning his attention back to the much slighted war in Afghanistan, Obama then sought to apply the very methods that he criticized Bush for employing in Iraq. Obama organized an Afghanistan surge, applying the same counterinsurgency strategy that had supposedly made the Iraq surge such a success, but the results proved to be a bit of a bust. In June of 2011, while announcing United States troop withdrawals from Afghanistan, President Obama said, "We take comfort in knowing that the tide of war is receding." In fact, however, the tide was not receding. Even as the United States was withdrawing troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, United States military activities in other parts of the Islamic world were actually expanding. The Obama administration's chief contribution to the ongoing war for the Middle East was to enlarge it. Prior to 9/11, the abiding defect in the United States policy to the Islamic world had been naivete. After 9/11, it became hubris. During Phase 4, the problem became one of diffusion. Varying according to the purpose, the Obama administration campaigns have fallen into three distinct categories. In some, the aim was to depose; in others, to repress; in others still, to retard. All share a common determination to minimize risks, to keep costs down, and, above all, to avoid anything approximating a quagmire. In the first category, to depose, was direct intervention in Libya and indirect intervention in Syria. The second category, suppress, including recurring military actions in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. The third category, retard and expanded war, America's war in the Middle East, into West Africa. The Pentagon calculated that a modest United States military presence there could nip violent jihad in the bud. Regardless of its intended purpose, little of this activity produced the desired effect. Overall, the number of active fronts in America's war for the Middle East multiplied. This has been President Obama's principal contribution to that war. And I'm going to just insert for a minute my own words here. Remember, Barack Obama was given the Nobel Peace Prize. And yet, he's proven himself to be anything except peace president.
That was a premature award.
Yes.
In any case, even if he had turned out to have been a peace president, it was awarded to him just because he showed up.
I think he should give it back.
Well, or at least, I don't think he actually takes much pleasure in it, because I think he knows it was just a token. We're running out of time.
Okay, and we've got just a
Okay. We're gonna
page and a
make it.
half left here, so we'll be okay. Yet transcending insignificant, President Obama's penchant for raids and assassinations was a fourth Gulf War, dating from 2013, which rendered a definitive verdict on the third Gulf War. When tested, the new U.S.-created Iraqi order proved unable to stand on its own, its manifest shortcoming drawing the United States into yet another round of fighting. Further complicating the situation was the evolving situation in neighboring Syria. There, an ongoing civil war morphed into a multi-sided affair that gave rise to a new entity, bent on carving out of Syria and Iraq a new Islamic caliphate. This new entity, ISIS, ISIL, or just the Islamic State, aimed to demolish the state system created by early 20th century Europeans who had reconfigured the greater Middle East to suit their own imperial purposes. By the time of President Obama's second term in office, Americans had pretty much exhausted their enthusiasm for rescuing Iraq. Furthermore, it was not self-evident that ISIS posed an immediate threat to the United States itself. In December of 2013, ISIS seized the Iraqi city of Fallujah and therefore emerged from al-Qaeda's shadow. Early the next month, the organization's supreme leader declaring the founding of the new caliphate and pronounced himself caliph. Worse was yet to come. June 2014, fewer than 1,000 ISIL fighters captured Mosul, Iraq's second largest city, with Iraqi defenders offering alarmingly little resistance. In Washington, something akin to panic set in. Obama announced the beginning of a new air campaign against the Islamic State, even as he assured Americans that "I will not allow the United States to be dragged into fighting another war in Iraq." Now, in the American military lexicon, mission creep is a term of opprobrium. 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 She said it right.
Opprobrium. It's hard.
It suggests action without clearly defined purpose, but when it comes to ISIS, the mission is unquestionably creeping. Here in the fall of 2015, no one can say how ISIS, the fight against ISIS, is going to turn out, but will defeating ISIS actually solve anything? Probably not. Since the conditions that have given rise to ISIL continue to exist. More importantly, in my view, obsessing about this one particular manifestation of a much larger problem allows Washington and perhaps all of us to skip lightly past matters of far greater moment. In that regard, even in a presidential election year, one subject in particular remains off limits.
The overall prospects of the U.S. military project in the Islamic world. 35 years after Jimmy Carter signed off on the Carter Doctrine, that project appears further from completion than when it had begun. By almost any measure, the region is less stable and more dangerous than it was in 1980. Not only are American purposes unfulfilled, they're becoming increasingly difficult to define with any sort of specificity. It's a generational problem, so remarked General Martin Dempsey in testifying before a Senate committee in July of this year. Thwarting the adversary that we face, Dempsey said, is going to entail a very long contest. How long? How much longer than it has already run? Wisely, General Dempsey did not hazard a guess. No one has a clue.
And between that and the early article that I wrote by Bruce Fine, Rand Paul has it right, neocons created ISIL, or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look back and get all that information because we read it. You have the actual facts about how ISIS was created and the demise that the quagmire that our nation is in right now.
Right.
From two of the most stellar individuals that know a lot more than the local commentarians want to spew out on the radio station here locally. So you might want to watch this show several times so you can know your historical facts
Because we're the good guys.
know the truth. Well, no, I think
I'm
that...
sorry, I was being facetious, but you know, it's like you said earlier, everybody really has a responsibility to try to get a hold of both sides of the story, not just one side.
Go to the experts.
Yeah.
And where you find the experts that are speaking out is usually in the metro area, and that's why I've been traveling more down there and recording, because that's where you get the real truth from, the speakers that are brought in there.
At least some, but this is such a complicated, twisted, snarled mess, this whole Middle East thing, and has been for so many decades now, that I don't know if we'll ever come to the end of the different ways of looking at it, but I think it behooves us to keep searching them out.
And eventually, hopefully, when all this is simmered down with what's going on in the Minneapolis area, with the shooting of Jamar Clark, in Black Lives Matter movement, I hope to be able to have Nakima come up here and join us for
that would be great.
interview, and maybe Rashad Turner with her, the leader of the Black Lives Matter movement, to speak out, and so the locals here can directly hear from them.
Yes.
I'm hoping that they will come up eventually.
That would be wonderful. Well, that's something to look forward to and to shoot for. Thank you so much for joining us today for Can We Talk? I'm Theresa Skorseth, this is Robin Hensel, and we're looking forward to seeing you again.
Thanks for watching.